thank you for joining us this afternoon. So, this is your first official visit to Portugal. Why do you want to strengthen the ties between the two countries?
Let me start by thanking each and every one, essentially the organizers of this event, which has been happening for quite some years. If we are reaching the 7th edition, which means that it is over 7 years, if not more, if we take account of COVID. Perhaps you did not meet, which means that it is something which has been happening years after years, growing as the MC stated. And I wish, first of all, to greet everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm glad again to share the dais with the Honorable Excellency President of Republic of Portugal, and honor to participate in this segment of the EurAfrica Forum. But I must confess, I preferred to listen to the dancers than listening to me, I'm sure. Because at the end of 2 days of intense discussion, it is now time to relax a bit. But nevertheless, I feel privileged to be here. And if today I'm here, I must first of all say the context. The context, and the credit goes to President, my good friend, President of Portugal, to the government of Portugal, and I know that this initiative, this laudable initiative of connecting with the diaspora is something which is laudable, and at the same time, reconnecting with the African continent, and through the African continent, with each and every African state, is something which we should upload. Why I say the African continent? Because does the African continent exist? It is a landmass. But behind this landmass, we have got 55 states. 55 states with its own history, with its own realities, different size, and whatever we talk about Africa, Africa is not an homogeneous continent. We should be alive to the history, reality, language. Everything is not the same. You have had French colonizers, Spanish colonizers, Portuguese colonizers, British colonizers, Belgium, all these together. And it is important to not just to realize and to reflect on the African continent as one entity. It is important not to put all the African states in one basket, and realize that each and every one of them has got their own culture, their own way of seeing things, and this is where I congratulate and applaud this initiative. We should be able to connect with those states, but having in mind, however, that the connection should not be a connection about, it should not be a bilateral connection. It should be a continental connection between two continents that need to work together. Portugal taking the lead to reconnect the whole of European countries, the 26 members of the European Union, together with the 55 countries forming part of the African Union. This, I believe, is the overarching objective of this forum. And in the same vein, I need to connect the other initiative, which is to connect the diaspora. This is in itself a very, very good initiative. And I'm glad of hearing Mr. Barroso stating, or somebody else, I don't recall, that you started with a youth, how you call it, connecting with the youth. Why I say so is we know that the African diaspora is everywhere. I'm sure it is. We're talking of millions. And my experience, I know that members of the diaspora remain attached to their motherland, but they are so involved in their own ambition, family problem, that they tend to reconnect when they reach retirement age. This is when they want to give back. But otherwise, if we can have the youth, our young diaspora, reconnected and engaging with their motherland early in their career, which means that all throughout their career, they will be able to help even more their motherland and ultimately more the continent. This is something over which I wanted to emphasize. Coming back now to Portugal. The credit goes to the president and the government of Portugal, but more than that, we know the history. We know that Portugal has a very long history. Mauritius has a history of 400 years. But the history of Portugal starts more than 1,000, perhaps more than that. I came from seeing the mayor, and he told me that Lisbon was the second capital city established after Athens. Just to give you the example, it's a young state, Mauritius, and Portugal, one of the oldest. But we have got many commonalities. We believe in peace and harmony. It is something which we profess. We know that it is a stability within our country that makes us great. It isn't the size. I know that many Portuguese are humble. The first thing that I hear from them, they are a small country. We are small. You may be small in size, but you are great in heart. And you have got a lot of conviction. You are a marine state, a famous tourist destination, an emerging champion in terms of marine science, fisheries, renewable innovation, and I'm glad that you are willing, you are making the first step to share, to collaborate, and to help other developing countries. Namely here, we talk about the African countries. And this brings me to, I saw it somewhere, your logo for this year is Partnership for Growth. When I see Partnership for Growth, this immediately reminds me of the SDGs, the 17th goal of SDG. And if I ask our students here, our distinguished guests here, what is the 17th goal of the SDG? I'd like to start with that, because for me this is the most important. The 16th goal will not be possible without the 17th goal. We need to partner, to collaborate. And this is what you have in your, one of your goals. Partnering, and it is through partners, collaboration, that there can be growth. And you have done exactly what should be done. This very noble act of sharing, of opening your arms.
Do not forget the mic.
Of opening your arms, just like the Jesus we have here, hugging each one of us, and we should respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you. President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, it has been said here the similarities between the two countries, and the two countries agreed in reinforcing cooperations in areas such as tourism, energy, the ocean. What can be done?
Well, thank you, Maria. Thank you, dear President Roopun. It's so friendly from you to be here, to have accepted this invitation. It's so kind and so fruitful. Your state visit to Portugal, but most of all, your presence here in this EurAfrican forum. Thank you. Thank you also, Diaspora Council, President Barroso, President Calçada. We launched the Young Diaspora today, with 24 of young people. Dear Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation, thank you for being here. Dear ambassadors, dear friends, from all over Africa and from all over Europe. Two preliminary remarks. One of them is this. I must admit that we Europeans so many times have not understood how important it is for Europe, Africa. All the African countries, the whole continent, not just because it's a continent of the future, in demography, in economy, in society, in youth, but also because sometimes we didn't understand what was going on in Africa, in the different countries and different regions in Africa. We were so much concerned with European problems that we forgot our neighbor. It's our closest neighbor. It's Africa. We Portuguese know it by heart, you recall it. But sometimes, all of us, and so many European countries that do not know Africa, do not understand. You must really know to understand and to feel what it is to be African. But there is an additional reason today for this partnership. This partnership should be much closer, much stronger, much more effective. But today there is an additional reason, it's called war. We have at least one war and a conflict neighboring Europe and Africa. The Ukrainian war and the situation in the Middle East. And in none of these two cases, you can have a sustainable, peaceful solution without Global South and without Africa. And for so long, we could not explain to our African friends that the war in Ukraine was not an European war. It was a global war involving global powers or strong regional powers. And so, seen from afar, from Africa, or for instance Latin America, but let us speak of Africa, things that were happening in Europe were not understood and not explained by the Europeans. And any solution at the level of the United Nations, at the level of any international organization, can't be found without having Africa involved, understanding it, in the sense of understanding that what is happening in Europe has global effects. Africa suffered inflation. Africa suffered, speaking of the raw materials, of the oil price, of the gas price. People of all over the world, but specifically of Africa, so close to Europe, were suffering for these 2 years and a half the effects of what was happening in Ukraine. And the same with Middle East, or Near East, as you want to call it. It's not possible to think that this world is not just one. It's one world. And in this world, the relation between Europe and Africa is so close, should be so close, so close, so close, that this partnership should be much more important than it has been in the past. Another example, migrations. Europeans only saw what migrations from Africa meant at the point of arrival, never at the point of departure. Never. The situation in wars, in climate change, in economic crisis, in social crisis, being lived in so many African countries, explained migrations from Central Africa to Northern Africa to the Mediterranean and then to Europe. And was Europe ready? Sometimes it was, but another so many occasions was ready to share with Africa in terms of investment, of economic support, of healthcare support. President Barroso spoke of it yesterday morning. On vaccination, what was being lived in Europe, in global north, or just the global south and in between Africa especially, were forgotten. It's so simple to discuss about the social problem, ignoring the causes, and what should have been done in terms of partnership for growth, for investment, for joint investment, for shared investment, for social commitment. And perhaps that's the moment now when we are facing not just the classic situation before the wars, but seeing the wars going on, to understand that we are connected, interconnected, inevitably interconnected. Well, speaking of Mauritius and Portugal. Portugal arrived there 500 years ago. Then, of course, other European countries were there. But what matters is that Portugal is a democracy for 50 years, and Mauritius got its independence, and it is fighting every day for democracy and rule of law, and economic development, and sustainable development, and social justice. And this sense, we are similar, so different, so far away, but it is the same concern, the same challenges we have to face. So that's why, if there is someone guilty of this delay in the state visit of President Predi It was Portugal, it was me. Of course, you a little bit, because you should have come a little bit earlier. Anyway, it's mostly my fault, our fault. But here we are. And yesterday we spoke of what we can do together on energy, renewables. Portugal is very good at it. On digital. On the oceans. On the ocean. On climate change interconnected with the ocean. On preserving biodiversity. On fighting for the situation of those islands, either in the Atlantic or in any other continent. It's a common cause. And so we discovered so many avenues of common and joint development and partnership for the future, new technologies. And it is a start. You may say it's too late for a start. It's never too late for a start.
Better late than never.
Never, never, never. So, well, that's it. What do you think, Brady? What do you think about these ideas of working together in all those fields and other fields?
Cooperation to keep.
Certainly.
Also, the EU is one of Mauritius' largest economic and development partners. What are the main areas? The same that you dealt with it in yesterday, or what can it?
Let me start by saying that the European Union has been a partner with Mauritius since independence. As you know, Mauritius, at the time of independence, was a monocrop country producing only sugarcane. At the time of independence, the prediction was doom and gloom. It was because we are of diverse origin. It was predicted that we will never be able to make it because there are so many different persons living together. But I won't come within what was the strategy we adopted at the time, but let me come straight away with the European Union. At that time, of course, it wasn't the European Union, but the entity was there with different name. We started with the Lomé Convention, where through European Union, they collaborated with us. We had a guaranteed price for our sugar. And this collaboration in terms of sugar, this enabled our transformation. And from there has always been constant dialogue between Mauritius and the EU. We built a relation of trust, mutual understanding. Then came the Cotonou Agreement, where we started to go towards import substitution, export in terms of manufacturing. We had access to the market. From there, we moved. We built up on trust. We also had, we wanted to ensure our, in terms of human rights, we have the support of the EU in terms of women empowerment, in terms of rule of law, good governance, eradication of poverty, moving from cane industry to sustainable development. We talk not about sugar, but the sugar cane as different byproducts. This is where we started to generate electricity with the bagasse, and it went on, and the partnership is is multifaceted. It is based on our needs, and this is how EU has been and is a trusted partner for Mauritius and has accompanied us all throughout our 50+ years of independence. But in addition to the EU, we wish also to complement this collaboration with the different member states of EU. Though we have got our historical link with France, for example, we also have a very strong bilateral relations with France. As a former colony of Britain, even at the time when the UK was still in the European Union, we also had a very vibrant engagement with the UK. But we wish that it doesn't remain just with France, UK, and a few major players within EU. We wish to engage with like-minded countries like Portugal, where we share a lot of commonalities. We have got the same ecosystem, the same values, democracy. We are an inclusive society. We have the same DNA in terms of what we wish to do. We have the same humility to open our arms. Our policy has also been one of openness. Mauritius doesn't have any natural resources as such. We're a small country, 2,200 kilometers square, 1.2 million inhabitants. The size of Mauritius is perhaps just like the size of a natural park in many African countries. We don't have any natural resources, but even then, what we managed to do was because of our attitude, of our attitude of openness, openness in our attitude, openness in our policy, locally, internationally, and we wanted and we have always been engaging with others. We believe in multilateralism. We believe that it is through collaboration that we can move ahead, and this is, in fact, what we have been doing. And at this juncture, where today we are facing a lot of conflict, it is obvious, we find it everywhere. But just imagine what has been what was Africa during these last 50+ years. Africa had the first country which had independence was in the 1960s, if I'm not mistaken, it was Ghana. And then all the different African countries got independence. The first years was quite difficult for many of them. We had so many coups. Then, in the 90s, a new wave came for some different reasons. They started to create institutions, to organize elections, and at some point in time, let us put it by the end of last century, there were many democracies. Difficult, but it was going in the right direction. Then we found something which happened is globalization was a good thing, but the share of globalization wasn't being equally distributed. Inequality started to occur. Then we had the famous Millennium Conference in South Africa to deal with extreme poverty. We had the situation you mentioned about health. We had, at the time, AIDS. You will remember that the pandemic all around Africa. Nevertheless, all the African countries was moving towards setting up democratic institution, starting to have elections. COVID came, inequality started, economic problems started to emerge, not only in Africa, everywhere. And let us see what happened during the last 5 years. What is happening in West Africa? People may say it is a problem of security. Yes, this is what we see. But what is the solution for this insecurity? The solution is an economic solution. This is how we should deal with the situation in Africa. If we want to have peace, stability in Africa, we should be able to trigger the economic development of Africa. We should be able to find the model of what types of economic development we should have, be able to produce, to develop, but try to ensure that there is no inequality, no inequity. Capitalism has served us well, but it needs now to be re-engineered, taking what we have learned during these last 40 years. What I may say, now it is time to rethink about the so-called Washington Consensus, what went right, how it now needs to be readapted to the new reality. I don't know if I know my good friend is here, has got a lot to say about that, but for me, the reality of today is that there cannot be stability in Europe if there is no stability in Africa.
President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, do you agree?
Well, Maria, allow me just to say 2 words before I answer this question. One is that we have in common the diaspora. Mauritius has a huge diaspora for the size of the territory and the size of the population. So when we are speaking of our diaspora council, I should think of yours all over the world. Second, the language. The Portuguese language, let me tell you, could be very interesting for Mauritius. Because you have a neighbor, Mozambique, and we have not as close neighbor as Angola, anyhow, that are huge countries, important economies and societies. And so I think, although we are very few in Mauritius, 68, just Portuguese, but they love living there. But it could be useful. Speaking of Portuguese language and of the Portuguese presence in international institutions, don't forget the Secretary General of the UN. Your friend, and my friend, and my former student, Antonio Costa, now President of European Confederation, European Council. So in a sense, well, I didn't want not to tell you these 2 words so that you cannot forget them when going back to your country. Don't forget it. Now, you're right. That's what I meant. No stable peace in the world with real universal support with African crisis. And I'm giving you examples. Not by coincidence, At the same time, we are having the war in Ukraine, because it's a war that involves global powers and regional strong powers. We have more conflicts in Africa. Coup d'etat. Situations where we have Portuguese presence in Central Africa, in humanitarian and peace missions, we saw that these conflicts get tougher and tougher. And they are radicalizing. Why? You know that, in a sense, global and regional powers, they are present a little bit everywhere outside the immediate area of intervention or influence. And Africa is a continent of the future. So, in a sense, looking at Africa, economic sustainable development in Africa, peace in Africa, rule of law in Africa, what you have in your country, stabilization in Africa. It's so important, not just for Europe, but for the world. It is. This could have been said with any other point of the world. But speaking of Africa, Africa is so close to the two conflicts, so close to several powers involved in the conflict. They are so present there that in a way, Africa is suffering and suffers the effect of the instability mostly seen as an instability in a neighboring continent. But the only way out is economic development in Africa. Sustainable means with social justice. It's the only way of avoiding conflicts, coup d'etat, revolutionary attempts, terrorism, and so on, so on, so on. But this asks us, I mean, people living in other continents, to look carefully at Africa and understand what is happening in Africa and be able to share with Africa. And that's partnership. There is no partnership if there is no strategic partnership connecting Europe and Africa. If Africa is not a priority for Europe, there won't be any partnership.
President, you've mentioned the relationship with Mozambique. Mauritius has a strong relationship with the Asian continent. Would this be interesting? Bridges could be done between the three continents?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. That's the point. This is the 7th forum. And throughout the 7 forums, we've had heads of state coming from Africa and the Portuguese head of state. And we do agree. But the problem is not of agreeing theoretically. Because there are people working on the field, working for this partnership on healthcare and economy and society, education, labor relations, and so on, so on, so on, ocean, climate change. But perhaps we do need, as that Europe, and when I speak of Europe, I speak of European Union, considers really this partnership as a priority for the future of Europe. It must be a priority for every European countries, for every member of the European Union, not just those that are closer to Africa. All of them. All of them. And the same with African countries. understanding. Of course, many of them, they can blame, even recently, European omissions. But this mutual knowledge and this political priority is a key point for the entrepreneurs, for business people, for the universities, for the research centers, for everyone, for the NGOs working in Africa. And you lack this political priority now. Of course, Europe is very much involved in conflict. That is a strong conflict and difficult one. But we must see it in the global and universal landscape. And Africa is so close that is the obvious closest partnership for Europe in the south. Obviously, more than Asia or Pacific, and even more than South Atlantic for so many European countries.
We are running out of time. Mauritius is an observer member of CPLP. Would you like to join CPLP one day?
We were engaged in 2006 as an observer. And in fact, as you know, Mauritius is bilingual. We speak French, we speak English. Many of us, because of our origin, we can speak a third language. Some speak Hindi, some speak Mandarin, some speak, even if they can't read, they understand Arabic, all those languages. And I was telling Mr. President de Sousa that we have got, like Portugal, so many of Portuguese speak French, speak English, and also Portuguese, because you are a hub in terms of tourism. In the same way, Mauritius is also a hub in tourism. And we should be able to encourage our Mauritian, our students, to learn Portuguese. And we wish to have the support of the CLP. It is CLP, isn't it?
CPLP.
CPLP, of which we are now an observer member. Try to see how we can engage in training to all those Mauritians who wish to learn Portuguese. This can help our industry. This can help Mozambican who visits Mauritius, so many of them, to connect, interact, where I must say that the solution for Africa is and should also be African states collaborating with each other. European countries, Portugal, others can help, but it should be also the Africans teaming up, trying to see where we can find common grounds and try to work together. Intertrade in Africa is very limited. Connecting within Africa is still a big problem. We are going to have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, but it should be implemented. We should be able to try to see, in addition to the tariffs, the non-tariff barriers, which is preventing African countries to trade with each other. Another aspect over which I believe we could have the support of Portugal is connectivity. And I mean here maritime connectivity. We need to be able to create markets within Africa At times, African countries are importing from far away, where other African countries could procure and provide those same products. It is a question of how to connect Mozambique, which is rich in fish, with other countries, how products which are being manufactured within landlocked countries can reach the nearest shore through maritime route, reach other countries. This is where we need also that Africans should collaborate with each other.
In this way, President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, does CPLP could have a word to say, an example to lead what's been said here?
Obviously, when Mauritius decided to join CPLP as observer, it was a huge step, important step. And now let us have the follow-up. Because there are the fields where we can cooperate. Tourism. Mauritius is very good on tourism. Portugal has 12% of GDP connected with tourism. Services, technological services. But speaking with CPLP, obviously, because two leading countries of CPLP, but also all of them, they are also leaders in a sense, but two important countries are Southern African countries. Mozambique, nearby, and Angola. Demographically, economically, financially, socially, so important. So you cannot forget it, and we must do more than we have achieved in the past.
And should Mauritius join CPLP in the future?
Yes, so that's why I'm optimistic about the future of CPLP. Yes, of course. CPLP is having year after year an increasing number of observers. Mm-hmm. Almost all the powers of the world are CPLP observers from every continent. Small economies also. Countries from every continent, but also, for instance, those that are in Asia Pacific. Because we cannot forget that Mauritius has another unique experience as a melting pot that connects
different cultures.
Africa with Asia. The Chinese influence, the Indian influence. And this is very, very important also, speaking of the role as observer in the CPLP. What do you think?
Let me just state a few things. You mentioned about connecting Asia to Africa, Asia to Europe, and state that Mauritius, we have got very historical connection with many Asian countries. Mm-hmm. We have a long-established relationship with India, with China, with Singapore and so on, but essentially with China and India. The first FTA China had with an African country was with Mauritius. The first Chinese Cultural Center Trust established by China outside China was with Mauritius. We have a SECPA with India. Coming to language, as Excellency de Sousa mentioned, we are exposed to a diversity of language. Myself, I used to be Minister of Arts and Culture. Let me tell you that we have got institutions which promotes English language, English-speaking union. We have got institutions which promote French language, Chinese language, Hindi, different regional languages of India. We have got also an Arabic-speaking union. We have got an Urdu-speaking union. Those speaking unions are there essentially because we have got Mauritians who understand the language, Mauritians who can converse in the language, Mauritians who have learned the language, and they interact, and they wish that others also can converse. And this is why I stated earlier, though 2 languages are taught since primary, it is French and English, but it is very often, you will very often find somebody speaking other languages. And also with the interaction of tourists, even languages which are not being taught formally, like Italian, our tourist industry workers have been exposed to tourists, they can speak Italian. And this is where I believe Excellency de Sousa mentioned, it is a melting point. In fact, it is a melting point. And not only a melting point, it is, we can create this connection between Asia, Middle East, Europe, to Africa. And in fact, you know, Mauritius, it has got all the ecosystem in terms of institutions, in terms of democracy, in terms of political stability. We can be, you can use Mauritius as a gateway to Africa. Being bilingual, we have got a mixed system of civil law and common law. We have got strong institutions, a full democracy. We are compliant with all the different recommendations of the FATF in terms of financing, in terms of money laundering, and so on. It is a trusted jurisdiction for investment. And in fact, many investors from Africa use Mauritius as a platform. Many Asians use Mauritius jurisdiction to set up their headquarters in Mauritius, because at the same time, it is a place where you have stability. We are part of Africa, but also not geographically in Africa. This is an added advantage.
Well, Mr. President.
Which means that we can be complementary and try to find this required mix between Asia, Europe, and Africa.
You've definitely left a picture of a modern and open country. President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, would you like to add a final note?
Well, it's impossible. I was so inspired by what President Roopun said that it's impressive, the example of Mauritius. Not just this interconnection between Africa, Asia, and Europe. Not just the language, official language, the English, but just the French also, and other languages, lecturing and teaching. But the example of rule of law, stability, political stability, economic stability, economic development. Well, this is so impressive. You can also think, now that you start knowing Portugal better, we are the same way. Economic stability, political stability, peaceful place to live in. So if once you get tired after this term, and who knows, another term as president, you can count on Portugal and have here a place to rest for a couple of weeks of holiday.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Thank you.
You
Thank
are
you.
welcome.
Maria, let me state that my apologies for having taken the mic and speaking for so long. You know,
We've all learned, so it's okay.
I don't know whether it is the first time that you're having two presidents who like to take the mic and don't just talk.
It was very nice. Thank you both. Thank you.
But otherwise, I wish you.
Thank you very much.